Before we begin, I want to welcome you to Family Shadows, a place where we share stories that might just remind you of someone you love, someone you've lost, or someone you might have taken for granted. These stories aren't fairy tales. They're drawn from the small, ordinary moments of family life that somehow turn into the memories we carry forever, for better or worse. If you've ever found yourself reflecting on what family really means, I hope you'll join us here. Subscribe, stay a while, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see your own story somewhere between the lines. Story title: They forgot my birthday, so I forgot their mortgage payment. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window, soft, steady, like the fingertips of someone who doesn't want to wake you but can't help reaching out. 64 years old today. You'd think by this age birthdays wouldn't matter much. You'd think the candles on the cake stop meaning anything once the kids are grown, the hair is gray, and the mirror becomes a little more selective about what it shows you. But the truth is, birthdays matter more as you get older. They're not about gifts or cake. They're about hearing from the people whose voices built your life. Just a happy birthday, Dad. A call, a text, a moment that says, we see you, you still matter to us. That morning, I made my coffee the way I always do, black, no sugar, in the same chipped navy blue mug I've had since my Navy days. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there at the kitchen table, watching the steam curl up like the years disappearing behind me. My phone buzzed. I smiled. It had to be Mark or Laura. My kids were busy, sure, but they knew. They always knew, or at least I thought they did. The screen lit up. A message from Mark. Mark, Dad, remember to make the mortgage transfer today. Due by 5 p.m. so the bank doesn't slap us with a late fee. Thanks. That was it. No happy birthday. No how are you feeling this morning, Dad. Just business. Just a reminder that I was, in their eyes, a standing order in the family budget. The mug felt heavier in my hand. I read it again, slower this time, like maybe I'd missed something. But I hadn't. The words were as cold as the rain outside. I took another sip of coffee and checked the time. 8:12 a.m. Still early. Laura might call. She's always been softer, more sentimental than her brother. Maybe she'd be the one. The next message came an hour later. Laura's name lit up my screen. I answered quickly, clearing my throat so my voice wouldn't sound too eager. Hey, Laura. Hey, Dad, she said, her voice muffled. I'm in a meeting, can't talk long, just checking you got Mark's message about the mortgage, right? Yes, I said, my fingers curling around the phone tighter. I got it. Good, okay, I'll call you later. Love you, bye. And that was it. A drive-by phone call. Love you, bye. Like a windshield wiper flicking once across the glass and then vanishing. I put the phone down and stared at it. My kitchen felt smaller somehow. The ticking clock on the wall was louder than usual. You might be wondering why a father in his 60s is still paying his grown kid's mortgage. I'll tell you why. After Linda, my wife, their mother, passed away 10 years ago, I promised myself I would do whatever it took to keep the family together. I watched them both struggle to find their footing. Mark was juggling a shaky real estate career, and Laura was drowning in student loans from her teaching degree. So I stepped in. Covered their mortgage payments when the bank came breathing down their necks. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't charity. It was love. It was me, keeping the roof over their heads so they could breathe a little easier. Every month, without fail, I wired that money over. And every month, I told myself this is what fathers do. This is what love looks like in action. But sitting there on my birthday morning, with nothing but a bill reminder to show for it, I started to wonder if maybe I'd blurred the line between love and obligation so much that they couldn't see me anymore. The rain kept falling. I glanced up at the calendar on the wall. Linda had circled this date in red ink years ago. Her handwriting, round and loopy, was still there. Bob's birthday red. She used to make a big deal out of it even if I told her not to. Pancakes in the morning. A candle stuck in the middle. The kids jumping on the bed to wake me up. I could almost hear her voice now, light and teasing. You're not getting older, Robert. You're just getting more distinguished. Linda never forgot. By noon, no one else had called. No grandkids with crayon cards. no surprise visits, just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the occasional swish of a car passing on wet pavement outside. It hit me then, not in a dramatic lightning bolt kind of way, but like a slow, heavy tide, that maybe this was it. Maybe my role in their lives had been reduced to an invisible line item. Dad, mortgage payment, paid monthly, reliable as the electric bill, and something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly, not yet. More like the quiet ache you get when you realize you've been talking to someone for years and they stopped listening a long time ago. I finished my coffee and washed the mug by hand, even though the dishwasher was empty. I've always liked doing things myself. Navy habit. I thought about making myself a birthday lunch, but the idea of eating alone at my own kitchen table didn't appeal. I went instead to the small desk in the corner and opened my laptop. The banking app blinked on the screen, the same way it always did when I logged in on the 15th mortgage day. Only this time, my hand hovered over the keyboard. The numbers were there, the transfer amount waiting like a loyal dog. One click and it would all be done. They'd never even think about it, just like always. But for the first time in a decade, I didn't click. I sat there, listening to the rain, and wondered what would happen if I didn't. What if, instead of sending that money to the bank, I sent it somewhere else? Somewhere it might actually mean something. The thought was small at first, just a spark. But it warmed me in a way no happy birthday text ever could. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Maybe I'd think about it more tomorrow. Or maybe tomorrow was too late. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window. I could almost hear Linda again, that same voice that used to coax me into doing things I never thought I would. Life's short, Robert. Don't just sit there. Do something with it. And for the first time all day, I smiled. Not because it was my birthday, but because I had an idea. The kitchen light caught on the glass cover of the old wall calendar, making it glint faintly as the rain outside softened to a drizzle. That calendar had been there for years, same spot, same little brass nail holding it up, the same thumb-smudged corners from turning the months. It wasn't just a place to jot down appointments or bills. It was, in its own way, a record of a life. This year's calendar was one of those free ones from the hardware store, each month with a black and white photograph of small-town America, grain silos in Iowa, fishing boats in Maine, autumn leaves over a Vermont bridge. But I didn't look at the picture for June. My eyes went straight to the square marked 15. A red circle, thick, imperfect, made with the same felt-tip pen Linda used to keep in the drawer by the sink. She'd written my name in it, Bob's birthday red. The heart was crooked like it always was when she rushed. It had been 10 years since she last held that pen. 10 years since I'd heard her voice in the morning, since I'd seen her head tilt when she laughed. But somehow her handwriting hadn't faded at all. I stepped closer, tracing the outline of the heart with my finger. That 1 inch of ink had more care in it than any message I'd gotten from my own children that day. Linda had a way of making birthdays sacred, even when we didn't have much. There was the year she baked me a cake out of pancake mix because money was tight. She'd lit a single candle and had the kids jump out from behind the couch, yelling, "Surprise!" I'd never laughed so hard in my life. And then there was the year she gave me a leather wallet she'd saved up for secretly, tucking a photo of the 3 of them inside before wrapping it. That wallet was worn thin now, edges fraying, but it still sat in my back pocket. The memory settled over me like a warm blanket, but it didn't last. My phone buzzed again from the table. I didn't rush to check it. When I did, it wasn't from Mark or Laura. It was from the bank, one of those generic alerts. Reminder, mortgage payment for account ending 2384 is due today. I stared at it for a long moment. The red heart on the calendar was behind me, the bank's demand was in front of me, and in the middle was me deciding which one mattered more. I sat back down, coffee gone cold, and thought about the years between that heart and this text message. After Linda passed, grief had hollowed out our house like termites in old wood. At first, the kids came by often. They'd sit at the kitchen table, talk about their jobs, their plans, what they missed about their mom. But slowly the visits thinned out. Calls came less often, and then somewhere along the way the conversations shifted. It wasn't "Dad, how are you holding up?" anymore. It was "Dad, do you think you could help us cover this?" Or "Dad, the mortgage is due earlier this month." I told myself it was fine. I told myself that was part of being a father, to keep giving, no matter what. To keep paying into a well even if you're not sure anyone remembers to draw from it. But that morning, with the rain tapping its patient rhythm and the red heart staring back at me, I felt the weight of every time I'd said yes without thinking. Every time I'd made sure their needs came before mine. The laptop was still on the counter. I hadn't closed the banking app from earlier. The numbers were still there, the same as they'd been for years, the amount, the account number, the due date. All it needed was a click. Instead, I closed the lid. Not yet, I thought. Not until I figured out what this day was really going to mean. The front porch creaked as I stepped outside, the smell of wet earth filling the air. Across the street, Mrs. Carter's American flag hung limp in the damp air. She was on her porch too, sweeping rainwater toward the steps. She looked up, waved, and called out, "Happy birthday, Robert." Her voice cut through the gray like sunlight. "Thank you, ma'am," I called back, raising a hand. She didn't need a reminder from a phone or a calendar to know. Somehow, she just remembered. And standing there, water dripping from the eaves, I realized the day didn't have to be what it had been so far. It could still turn. It could still mean something. I just didn't yet know how. The rain had eased into a mist by the time I stepped back inside, the kind of mist that clings to your jacket and hair without you realizing it. I hung my coat on the hook by the door, the same hook where Linda used to hang hers, the one with the frayed leather strap still dangling from the loop. The kitchen felt different now, not just because of the damp air I'd let in, but because my mind had started wandering back over the years. Not the birthdays I'd missed for myself, but the ones I'd made sure no one else in my family missed. 10 years. 10 years of standing behind them like a stagehand who knows every cue but never steps into the spotlight. After Linda's funeral, Mark and Laura were both in their 30s, but still leaning on us more than they'd ever admit. Mark had just taken a gamble on a small real estate firm that was bleeding money faster than it could bring any in. Laura was teaching at a public school, making enough to scrape by, but not enough to pay off the loans that had put her there. I remember sitting at this same table with both of them, my Navy pension check in one hand and the mortgage statements in the other. Mark had been fidgeting with his tie, back then he still wore one, and Laura's eyes had been glassy, the way they get when she's too proud to cry. They didn't ask me outright, not at first, but I could see the weight pressing down on them, the kind of weight that keeps you up at night and makes you wonder which bill you can skip without the lights going out. "Let me take care of it," I'd said, and just like that the decision was made. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a few months to get them through the rough patch, but months turned into years, and before long it wasn't a patch, it was the fabric of how we lived. Every 15th of the month, without fail, I made the transfer. I kept my own expenses low. I didn't take the fishing trips I'd talked about with Frank. I kept driving the old Chevy even when it coughed like it had pneumonia. New winter coat, maybe next year. Roof repairs, just patch it for now. There was one Christmas, the second after Linda died, when I'd wanted to surprise them with a small trip. Just the three of us, somewhere warm, maybe Florida. I'd even picked out a little beachfront motel that reminded me of the places Linda and I used to go when the kids were small. But then Mark called about a late fee on the mortgage, and I quietly moved that vacation fund right back into the payment account. They never knew about the trip, never even asked why I stayed home that winter. I told myself over and over, this is what fathers do, this is what love is, and maybe it was. But love, I was learning, can become a habit so strong that you stop asking if it's still being returned. The truth is, I wasn't just paying for their house. I was paying for the illusion that we were still as close as we used to be, that they still needed me, and maybe I needed to believe that as much as they needed the money. I glanced over at the calendar again, the red heart marking today still bold as ever. Linda's handwriting had always been sure, deliberate. It said without saying, "You matter. You're worth celebrating." The phone on the counter was silent now, not even a stray text from a distant cousin. I poured myself another cup of coffee, reheating it in the microwave because waste was something I could never get comfortable with. As the machine hummed, I thought about all the years I'd been content to be in the background, to be the man who kept the lights on but stayed in the shadows. It hit me that maybe the reason I was standing behind them all this time was because it was safer there. No expectations of gratitude. No risk of being hurt if they forgot me because in some quiet way I'd already prepared for that. But this morning, something was different. The forgetting wasn't just something I'd braced myself for. It had arrived. It had walked right in, wearing the faces of my own children, carrying nothing but a reminder to pay their bills. And I wasn't sure I wanted to keep standing in the same place anymore. The microwave beeped, pulling me out of my thoughts. I took the mug out, the ceramic hot against my palm, and sat down again at the table. The coffee tasted burnt now, reheated too long, but I drank it anyway. Waste not, want not. That was another Navy habit, one that had followed me into every corner of my life. I stared at the phone for a long time. It was almost noon, still no birthday call from either of them, no message with balloons or cake emojis, no hope you're having a good day, Dad. The only thing I'd gotten was a bill reminder, and somehow that felt worse with every passing hour. I decided to call Laura. She'd always been the gentler one. If anyone might soften the sharpness of the morning, it would be her. I hit her name on my contact list, and the phone rang twice before she answered. Her voice came through low and quick, like she was talking to me from the corner of a busy room. "Hey, Dad, I can't really talk long. I'm in the middle of a planning meeting for the summer program." "That's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Just wanted to." "You got Mark's text about the mortgage, right?" She cut in. "I did." "Good. We just really need to make sure it clears before the deadline. They've been a little strict lately with late payments." "I see." There was a pause on her end. Maybe she noticed my tone, or maybe she didn't. "Okay, I have to get back to this. I'll talk to you later, Dad. Love you." "Love you too," I said, but the line had already gone dead. I held the phone in my hand for a moment after the call ended, the hum of the connection still faint in my ear. The words she'd said, or rather the ones she hadn't, hung heavier than I expected. No mention of the day, no recognition, just business. I set the phone down slowly, as if being careful not to break something fragile. But what I felt breaking wasn't the phone. It was something quieter, deeper, like a wire stretched too far for too long, finally fraying in the middle. I looked around the kitchen, at the little pieces of my life scattered in plain sight. The mug Linda had bought on our trip to Cape Cod, the chipped edge of the countertop from when Mark was a boy and dropped a toolbox there, the faded family photo pinned to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. These were the artifacts of a life I'd built with love, but in the voices of my children today I heard none of it reflected back. And for the first time I didn't rush to excuse it. I didn't tell myself they're busy or they mean well. I let the truth settle in. They had forgotten. Not because they were too busy to remember, but because remembering me, really seeing me, wasn't part of their rhythm anymore. That realization didn't come with anger, not yet. It came with a strange, steady clarity. I got up, walked to the small desk in the corner, and opened the drawer where I kept my checkbook. I pulled out the latest mortgage statement just to look at it. The numbers stared back at me in neat, black print, cold, precise, indifferent. It wasn't lost on me that I could make the payment right now, and the rest of the month would look exactly like the last 120 months had. The bank would be satisfied. My kids would carry on. And I'd be right back in the shadows, holding everything up while no one noticed the weight. But another thought had started to take root, quiet but firm. Maybe just this once I wouldn't send it. Maybe I'd keep that money for something else, something that actually meant something to me. The idea didn't feel like revenge. It felt like oxygen. I closed the drawer and stood there for a long time, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the distant drip of rainwater from the gutter outside. Somewhere in that stillness, a decision was beginning to form. The afternoon light was thin by the time I sat back down at the kitchen table. Clouds had drifted low enough to blur the line between sky and rain, and the world outside my window had settled into that muted gray that makes you want to turn on a lamp just to prove you're still here. I was halfway through a crossword puzzle, one of those half-hearted attempts to keep my mind busy, when the phone buzzed again. The screen lit with Mark's name. It wasn't a call, it was a text. Mark, hey Dad, just touching base on the mortgage. Did you send it yet? Want to make sure it goes through before 5. Bank's been breathing down my neck about late payments. No happy birthday. No, by the way, hope you're having a good day. Not even a passing nod to what the date was. Just another reminder that the transfer was due. I stared at the message for a long moment, the phone heavy in my hand. If I were a different kind of man, maybe I'd have typed something sharp, something that cut right to the bone. Do you remember what today is? Or son, there's more to our relationship than me paying your bills. But I didn't type any of that. I didn't type anything at all. Instead, I set the phone down, face down, so the screen went black. It's strange, you can love someone so much that you stop noticing the ways they've come to take you for granted. Until one day, it's like you're seeing them from across the street instead of across the table, and the distance is impossible to ignore. I got up and poured myself another cup of coffee. I'd lost count of how many that day, and watched the dark liquid swirl into the mug. The steam rose up, carrying with it the faint memory of mornings when the kids were little. Back then, they'd sneak into the kitchen early to make me breakfast in bed, which usually meant a cold Pop-Tart on a paper plate and a glass of orange juice spilling over the edge. I'd pretend it was the best meal I'd ever had, and maybe in a way it was, but those mornings were long gone. Somewhere along the way, we'd traded that clumsy, joyful love for this transactional rhythm. The clock ticked on, 3:12 p.m. I imagined Mark sitting in his office, tapping his foot, glancing at the time, waiting for the alert from the bank that the payment had gone through. I imagined Laura probably still in her meeting, assuming it was all taken care of because it always was. The thing about always is, people stop asking if it's still possible. They just assume. I walked back to the small desk in the corner and opened the laptop again. The banking app flickered to life. The payment amount was still there, the cursor hovering over the submit button like it had a mind of its own. I sat there breathing in the quiet, and then without thinking too hard I closed the lid. Not yet. The decision didn't feel reckless. It didn't feel cruel. It felt deliberate. As if for the first time in years I was reclaiming something that belonged to me. The phone buzzed again, another message from Mark. Mark, Dad, need confirmation, can you reply? I didn't. I let it buzz twice more before it went silent. The truth was, I had other plans for that money now. Plans that didn't involve bailing out the same people who couldn't find 30 seconds in their day to call their father on his birthday. And as that thought settled in, I realized I wasn't just deciding not to pay the mortgage today. I was deciding to do something for myself. I just didn't know what yet. There's a drawer in the hallway I don't open often. Not because there's anything shameful in it, just the opposite. It's full of the things I've put aside for later. A gift card to a steakhouse Frank gave me 3 years ago, still unused because I kept meaning to wait until I had a reason to celebrate. A brochure for a fishing trip in Alaska I used to keep on my desk, now folded and creased from being shoved to the back of the drawer. A pair of leather gloves I bought on clearance last winter but never wore because I didn't want to scuff them up. Every item in that drawer is a little marker of a moment when I chose someone else's needs over my own. It's easy to do that once or twice, but when you do it for 10 years straight, you start to forget there's even another option. You start to think that taking something for yourself is somehow taking it from them, as if the whole pie belongs to everyone else and you're just the guy who bakes it. After Linda died, I told myself my kids' stability was the only thing that mattered. I figured if they could have a home without worrying about the bank breathing down their necks, they'd have one less reason to fall apart. I thought that was love. And maybe it was, but it wasn't sustainable, not the way I did it. I remember one winter about 5 years ago. My old Chevy had been sputtering for weeks, the kind of rattle that tells you the transmission's on its last legs. I had just enough saved to get it fixed, not replaced, just fixed, when Laura called about a surprise expense. The roof on their house had sprung a leak. She was panicked, worried about water damage. I didn't hesitate. I wired the money that afternoon, told myself I'd manage the Chevy a little longer. That a little longer turned into another year of coaxing it through snowstorms, hoping each turn of the key wouldn't be its last. Or the summer before that, when Frank invited me on a road trip through the Rockies. He'd mapped the whole thing out: motels, diners, scenic overlooks. I wanted to go so badly I could taste it. But Mark had been short that month and the mortgage was due, and I couldn't imagine telling him no. So I told Frank maybe next year. Next year never came. The truth is, I stopped thinking of myself not because I didn't want things, but because I convinced myself I didn't deserve them unless everyone else was taken care of first. It's a noble lie, that one. It lets you ignore your own needs without feeling selfish. But like any lie, it has a cost. The cost is that one day you wake up on your 64th birthday, for example, and realize you've built a life where the people you love don't see you as a person with dreams and needs of your own. They see you as a dependable utility, always on, always ready, always invisible. Standing there in my kitchen, I felt the weight of every year I'd done that to myself, and it hit me that the only person who could stop it was me. The money sitting in my account wasn't just numbers on a screen, it was possibility. It was a fishing trip I hadn't taken, a dinner I hadn't enjoyed, a small joy I'd postponed 100 times. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to spend it on something or someone who might actually remember my birthday next year. By late afternoon, the rain had turned to a fine drizzle, the kind that hangs in the air like a veil. I sat by the kitchen window with my mug, fresh coffee this time, not reheated, and let the quiet settle in. The house had a way of sounding bigger when it was still. You could hear the creak of the old beams, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional sigh of the heating vent. Out the window, the maple tree in the yard stood bare except for a few stubborn leaves, curled and brown, clinging to branches that had long since given up on autumn. I'd always liked that tree. It had survived 2 lightning strikes and a blizzard that split half the neighborhood's trees in half. And there it was, still standing, still holding on. I wrapped both hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. For years, this had been my moment of peace: coffee by the window, watching the world without anyone watching me. But today, it felt different. I wasn't watching the street for my kids' cars to pull up. I wasn't listening for the phone to ring. Somewhere between Mark's second message and Laura's quick call, I'd stopped expecting anything from them today. And with that expectation gone, something surprising crept in: calm. It was a quiet calm, the kind you get when you finally decide you're done waiting for someone to treat you the way you treat them. When you stop making excuses for the people you love, and you start loving yourself enough to set the scale back to even. I thought about the red heart on the calendar again, about Linda's way of marking the day like it mattered. She had always believed in making space for celebration, no matter how small. To her, birthdays weren't just about getting older. They were about taking one day out of the year to say, "I'm glad you're here." I couldn't remember the last time anyone had said that to me. The drizzle picked up, tiny drops streaking down the glass in crooked lines. Across the street, Mrs. Carter had gone inside. Her porch light was on now, casting a warm circle onto the damp pavement. I took a sip of coffee and let my mind wander. There was a time when I would have given anything to have my kids here, to hear them laugh in this kitchen, to have them argue over who got the last slice of cake. But the truth was, they hadn't been that kind of family in a long time, and I'd been holding on to an idea of us that didn't match the reality. That's when the thought came back, the one I'd been pushing to the edge of my mind all afternoon. What if I didn't make the mortgage payment today? Not out of spite. Not as a punishment, but as a choice to do something different, something for me. I pictured myself telling them, Mark's forehead creasing, Laura's voice tightening. They'd be angry, sure, confused, maybe even hurt. But then again, wasn't I already those things? The difference would be that this time, I'd be the one holding the decision in my hands. I leaned back in my chair, the steam from the mug brushing my chin, and let the idea settle in like an old friend finally coming through the door. I didn't know yet exactly what I'd do with the money, but I knew I wouldn't be wiring it to the bank before 5 o'clock. For the first time all day, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I might gain. By 4 o'clock, the daylight was fading fast. The sky pressed low and heavy over the neighborhood. I could feel the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall, every second a reminder that the bank's deadline was coming up. I got up, rinsed out my coffee mug, and stood at the sink for a moment, watching the water swirl down the drain. My hands were warm from the tap, but there was a coolness in my chest, not discomfort, not fear, just the cool steadiness that comes when you've already made up your mind, even if you haven't said the words out loud yet. A small desk in the corner seemed to draw me toward it. The laptop sat there, still closed from earlier. I opened it, the hinge giving its usual soft creak, and the banking app blinked onto the screen like a sentry waiting for orders. There it was, the familiar set of numbers, the exact amount I'd sent every month for 10 years. The account number already filled in, the payment date today flashing at me like it was urgent. All it needed was a click. For a moment, my finger hovered over the trackpad. My mind tried to do what it always did, slide back into the habit, remind me that this was my role, my duty, my unspoken promise to them. I thought about how Mark would relax the moment the payment cleared, how Laura wouldn't even think twice about it because she never had to. But then I thought about the red heart on the calendar, about the silence this morning, about the fact that the only words I'd heard from them today had been about money, and I lowered my hand. I didn't delete the payment. I didn't transfer the money anywhere else, not yet. I simply closed the laptop slowly, deliberately, as if I were tucking a sleeping child into bed. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. I walked to the coat rack and pulled on my jacket. The drizzle outside had turned into a steady, light rain again, but I didn't mind. I needed air. I needed space away from the walls of this house and the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the calendar on the wall. I stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me, and just stood there for a minute, breathing in the damp evening air. The neighborhood was still, just the sound of rain tapping against the gutters and the distant hiss of tires on wet pavement. The money was still sitting in my account, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't going to send it where it had always gone. I didn't know exactly where it would end up yet, but I knew it would be somewhere different, somewhere that made me feel like more than just a line item in someone else's budget. The decision was made, quietly, simply. No big speeches, no confrontation, not yet, but it was done all the same. I had only made it as far as the end of the porch when my phone buzzed in my pocket. For a second, I almost ignored it, half expecting another message from Mark, tapping his watch, wondering if the payment had gone through yet. But when I pulled the phone out, the name on the screen stopped me. Frank Miller. I hadn't heard his voice in months. We'd served together back in the Navy, him with that easy grin that could get him out of trouble faster than I could get into it. He was the kind of friend who never let years or miles dull the connection, though lately life had been doing its best to keep us apart. I swiped to answer. Robert Hayes, Frank said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Happy birthday, old man. For the first time all day, I laughed. It was small, rough around the edges, but it was real. You remembered. Of course I remembered, he said. You think I'd forget the guy who pulled me out of the drink off Norfolk in '83? Not a chance. We talked for a few minutes, slipping back into the rhythm we'd had for decades. He told me about the fishing trip he'd just taken down to the Gulf, about the new pup his daughter had brought home, about the little things that make life feel fuller. Then, almost casually, he said, "Listen, a few of the guys are getting together tonight down at Keller's. You know, the old bar near the docks. Just swapping stories, maybe a little music, nothing fancy. You should come." I hesitated, glancing back through the window at the kitchen table, at the closed laptop sitting there like a decision I'd already made but hadn't said out loud. "It's been a long day," I said. "All the more reason," Frank replied. "Come on, Robert. We don't get nights like this back, and you need to be around people who know the value of a birthday." That last line landed harder than he probably meant it to. I thought about the money sitting in my account, about the years I'd spent standing in the background of my own life, about the fact that I'd been waiting all day for a celebration that was never going to come from the people I'd expected it from. "All right," I said finally, "I'll be there." "You better," he said, chuckling, "and don't show up empty-handed. It's your birthday, you, by the first round." We hung up and I stood there on the porch for another moment, letting the rain mist against my face. The street was still quiet, but something in me felt different, lighter. I went back inside, grabbed my keys from the hook and glanced once more at the calendar on the wall. The red heart was still there, a promise from Linda that the day mattered. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to keep that promise for myself. I didn't know yet exactly how the night would go, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to end my birthday sitting alone at the kitchen table, waiting for someone else to make it special. The rain had picked up by the time I locked the front door behind me, keys in one hand, phone in the other. I didn't head straight for the truck. Instead, I walked back into the kitchen, flicked on the overhead light, and stood there for a moment just taking in the room. The red heart on the calendar was almost glowing under that warm light. Linda's handwriting, the loop of the B, the slightly uneven curve of the heart, felt like it was urging me forward. Frank's voice was still in my ear. Be around people who know the value of a birthday. I'd spent the better part of the day thinking about what I wasn't going to do, about not sending the payment, about breaking a 10-year habit. But now, for the first time, I started thinking about what I could do instead. It wasn't enough to just skip the mortgage transfer. That would have been an act of absence, a statement of "I won't." I wanted to make this day mean something. I wanted to replace what had been taken from me with something better. The number in my account wasn't enormous, but it was more than enough for a night worth remembering. More than enough to gather the people who still remembered my name without seeing it on a bill. I pulled a notepad from the kitchen drawer, the one with a coffee stain in the corner, and started making a list. Frank, of course. Mrs. Carter across the street. Eddie, the retired dock worker who'd helped me fix the fence last summer. Paul and Harriet from church. They'd been there for me after Linda's funeral when my own kids couldn't make the time. And maybe a few of the old Navy guys who lived close enough to drive down. The idea started small, just meet Frank at Keller's like he'd suggested, but it grew quickly. Why not make it more than a drink at the bar? Why not book the back room, order some food, maybe even hire that local guitarist who plays on Thursdays? I could picture it already. The smell of fried shrimp and grilled burgers, the sound of laughter bouncing off the wood-paneled walls, the kind of easy storytelling that only happens when you're with people who have seen you at your worst and still show up. I'd been invisible in my own family for too long. Tonight I'd be seen. I picked up the phone and called Keller's. The owner recognized my voice right away. Small towns have a way of keeping your name in the right ears. "Hey Robert," he said, "what can I do for you? I hear you've got that back room open tonight." "Sure do. You looking to book it?" "I am, for tonight. Couple dozen folks, maybe more. Food, drinks, the works." There was a pause. "For what occasion?" "My birthday," I said, and the words felt solid, almost defiant. Pete chuckled. "Well, hell, happy birthday. We'll take good care of you." We went over the details quickly: menu, seating, a little stage for the guitarist. By the time I hung up, the plan was set. I sent a few texts, made a few calls. Everyone I reached said the same thing, wouldn't miss it. It struck me how quickly they said yes, without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. When I put the phone down, the kitchen felt warmer somehow. The bank would close in less than an hour. Mark would probably send another message any minute now. But I wasn't thinking about him, or the payment, or the deadline. I was thinking about Keller's, about the smell of salt air by the docks, about the sound of Frank's laugh when I walked through the door. For once, the night ahead felt like mine. By the time I stepped out into the night, the rain had eased again, leaving the streets slick and shining under the glow of the street lamps. The air smelled like wet asphalt and salt from the bay. I slid into the driver's seat of my old Chevy, the familiar creak of the leather seat greeting me like an old friend. Keller's was about 50 minutes away down near the water, but my hands on the wheel seemed to have a mind of their own. Instead of heading straight there, I took a turn onto Maple Avenue, the street where Mark's house sat. I told myself I wasn't going there for any reason, just passing by, just curious. But as the truck rolled down the block, I found my eyes searching for the glow of porch lights, for the silhouettes of the family inside. The house stood there, tall and tidy, the one I'd helped pay for month after month. The siding was a clean white, the shutters a dark green. I'd painted those shutters myself one summer while Mark and Emily were on vacation, so they wouldn't have to hire someone. Tonight, every light on the first floor was blazing. Through the front window, I could see movement, figures crossing back and forth. Emily appeared first, carrying a tray toward the dining room. Then Mark, dressed in a collared shirt, laughing at something over his shoulder. A moment later, Laura's voice carried faintly out to the street. She was there too. I couldn't see her clearly, but I could picture her sitting at the table, probably in the seat I'd taken so many times before. I slowed the truck, keeping my headlights dim. The dining room was full, plates on the table, glasses of wine catching the light, laughter spilling out in bursts. They were all there, gathered under the roof I'd helped keep over their heads, sharing a meal on my birthday. Without me. There was no cake, no candles, but it didn't matter. They'd chosen their company for the evening, and I wasn't part of it. I felt no rush of anger, no sting of surprise. I'd already spent the day learning this truth in smaller ways. Seeing it laid out in front of me now was just confirmation. I pulled the truck forward, past the house, past the bright windows and the sound of their voices. The road ahead was darker, quieter. When I reached the corner, I turned toward the docks. Keller's was waiting. And tonight, so were people who'd notice if my chair was empty. As the engine hummed beneath me, I realized something. Driving away from that house didn't feel like leaving something behind. It felt like heading towards something new. The closer I got to the docks, the more the air changed. The salt smell was stronger here, mixing with the faint scent of diesel from the fishing boats tied up for the night. Street lamps glowed over the wet pavement, their reflections stretching long and broken in the puddles. Keller's sat just where it always had, a squat brick building with a green awning and a neon sign that flickered a little at the edges. I'd been here more times than I could count over the years, but never for anything that felt like this. Never for something that was mine alone. The parking lot was half full, puddles reflecting the glow from the windows. As I stepped out of the truck, I could hear the muffled hum of voices and the low strum of a guitar from inside. Pete, the owner, was behind the bar when I walked in, his wide grin ready before I'd even reached him. "Robert Hayes," he said, coming around to clap me on the shoulder. "Happy birthday, my friend. The back room's all set for you." I followed him past the regulars hunched over their beers, past the dartboard and the jukebox to the wooden door at the far end. Pete swung it open, and I stepped into a room that was already alive. Frank was there, standing near the table with two other Navy buddies, Eddie and Sam. Mrs. Carter sat in the corner, a cup of tea in her hands, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. Harriet and Paul were talking to a few of the dock guys, their laughter rolling easily over the music. "Look who decided to show up," Frank boomed, pulling me into one of those hugs that feels more like an anchor being dropped solid and grounding. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, and I meant it. The guitarist in the corner, a kid barely 30 with a voice rougher than his years, strummed something easy and warm. Plates of food were already on the tables. Fried shrimp, onion rings, sliders, baskets of fries. The smell was a welcome punch to the senses, cutting through the damp of the night. Someone handed me a beer, and I raised it almost instinctively. "To good friends," I said, and the room answered back in unison, "To good friends." I moved from table to table, catching up, swapping stories, laughing in ways I hadn't in months. No one here cared about the mortgage payment I hadn't sent. No one was keeping a ledger. They were here because they wanted to be, because they remembered. At one point, Mrs. Carter leaned over and patted my hand. "You know, Robert, birthdays aren't about how many people show up. They are about the kind of people who do." Her words settled somewhere deep in me. The guitarist started playing an old song Frank and I used to hear on the radio when we were stationed together. Without thinking, we both sang along, our voices not matching the key but matching each other. The others clapped, some joining in on the chorus. It wasn't a big party. There were no decorations, no speeches, no candles to blow out. But it was real. Every face in that room had looked at me tonight and seen me, not as a bill payer, not as a backup plan, but as a man worth showing up for. And as the night stretched on, I felt something loosen in my chest. Maybe this was what Linda had meant all those years ago when she insisted on making birthdays special. Not the cake, not the gifts, but the feeling, the certainty that you mattered. For the first time all day, I didn't think about who wasn't here. I thought about who was. It was sometime after 9 when I stepped outside for a breath of air. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the pavement dark and glossy under the street lamps. The night was warm for early spring, the kind of warmth that sneaks in after a wet day, wrapping itself around you like a quiet blanket. Inside, I could still hear the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, the soft twang of the guitar. I didn't want to miss a moment of it, but I also wanted to stand here for a while, just to feel the air on my face and let the truth of the evening sink in. That's when my phone started buzzing in my pocket. Not once, not twice. It kept going, a rapid series of vibrations that told me exactly who it was before I even looked. Mark. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I swiped to answer. Dad. His voice was tight, clipped. The bank just called me. They said the mortgage payment hasn't gone through. What's going on? I didn't answer right away. I watched a bead of water slide down the side of a street lamp, catching the light as it fell. Dad, did you forget? I texted you twice. I didn't forget, I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. There was a pause on his end. Okay, so why hasn't it been sent? I could hear the shuffle of papers in the background, the faint murmur of Emily's voice somewhere behind him. He wasn't calling because he was worried about me. He was calling because a due date had passed. I decided not to send it this month, I said, still watching that bead of water disappear into the blacktop. What? What do you mean you decided not to, Dad? This isn't optional. We've got a contract with the bank. If it's late, there's a penalty. I know how mortgages work, Mark. The edge in my voice made him pause. Then why? I could have said a dozen things. I could have told him it was my birthday. I could have told him that all I'd gotten from him and his sister today were reminders to send money, that neither of them had taken 30 seconds to call. I could have told him that for 10 years I'd made that payment like clockwork, often at the expense of my own needs, my own life. Instead, I said, I thought I'd use the money for something else this time. Something in my tone must have landed because he didn't speak for a moment. I could almost hear him trying to figure out if I was joking. What could possibly be more important than keeping our mortgage current? Keeping myself current, I said simply. From inside Keller's, laughter spilled out as someone opened the door. Frank's voice boomed above the rest, calling my name. The warmth of that room was only a few steps away. Mark's voice came back sharp now, the panic rising. Dad, this isn't funny. We're going to get hit with a fee and... Mark, I said, cutting him off. I'll talk to you tomorrow. And before he could respond, I ended the call. For a moment, I just stood there, the phone cooling in my hand. Then I slipped it back into my pocket and turned toward the door. The music and the laughter welcomed me back inside, pulling me away from the weight of that conversation. Tonight was mine. Tomorrow could wait. The next morning, the light came in slow and soft, sliding across the floorboards in pale stripes. I woke later than usual, not because I'd stayed out too late, but because, for the first time in a long while, I'd slept without the gnawing sense that I'd forgotten to do something for someone else. The house was quiet. No hum of the coffee maker yet, no radio, no TV. Just the low tick of the wall clock and the faint crack of the wood as it warmed in the sun. I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, black and strong, and waited for the weight of regret to settle in. It didn't. Instead, there was a steady kind of stillness in me, like the calm after a storm. The mortgage payment hadn't gone out. That fact sat in my mind as plainly as the coffee mug sat in my hand. And instead of anxiety, there was something that felt almost like relief. The phone was silent for most of the morning. No calls from Mark, no texts from Laura. I imagined them both stewing, trying to decide who should call first, maybe waiting to see if I'd come to my senses and send the money late. By noon, the silence had taken on a weight of its own. I didn't break it. I thought about Keller's the night before, the warmth of the back room, the sound of Frank's laugh, the way Mrs. Carter had squeezed my hand. That room had been full of people who wanted me there, not because they needed something from me, but because they remembered I was worth showing up for. In contrast, this silence from my kids didn't hurt the way I expected it to. It told me something important. They weren't calling to ask if I was all right. They were waiting to see if the money would arrive. I got up, walked to the desk in the corner, and opened the laptop. The banking app was still there, payment details saved, cursor blinking in the submit box like it was waiting for an apology. I closed it without touching a key. The decision was already made yesterday. What I was feeling now wasn't defiance, it was ownership. Around 2 in the afternoon, the phone finally rang. Laura this time. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. An hour later, Mark texted. Mark, Dad, I don't know what's going on, but this is serious. Please call me. I didn't. I poured myself another cup of coffee instead and stood by the window watching the street. Across the way, Mrs. Carter was sweeping her porch, humming to herself. She glanced up, caught my eye, and waved. I waved back. That tiny exchange, a wave, a smile, was more acknowledgement than I'd gotten from my own children on my birthday. The weight of the silence was still there, but it wasn't crushing. It was clarifying. For years, I'd carried the belief that love meant always saying yes, always giving, always stepping in before anyone else felt the pinch. But love, real love, has to be something more than obligation. And sitting there in my kitchen, I realized that maybe the only way my kids would ever see me again, truly see me, was if I stepped out from behind the role I'd been playing for a decade. That process had started yesterday. Today, the silence was just proof that I'd been right to begin. It was just after 4 in the afternoon when my phone buzzed again, not with a call this time, but with a notification from a name I hadn't seen in years. Jenny Miller, Frank's daughter. She'd tagged me in something on Facebook. I wasn't much for social media. My account was mostly a handful of fishing pictures, a couple of old Navy reunions, and one photo of Linda in her garden that I could never bring myself to take down. But curiosity got me, and I tapped the notification. The post opened to a photo from Keller's the night before. Frank must have handed Jenny his phone at some point, because there, I was in the center of the frame, sitting at the long wooden table, leaning back mid-laugh. Around me were the faces from the night, Mrs. Carter with her cup of tea, Eddie gesturing with a shrimp in hand, Harriet smiling wide. In the background, the guitarist was half-lit, head bent over the strings. The caption read, "Last night, we celebrated one of the good ones. Happy birthday, Robert Hayes. A man who's given more to the people around him than they'll ever know, and finally let us give something back." I stared at the picture longer than I meant to. My first thought was how rare it was to see myself like that, not posing, not guarded, just there. The post had already gathered more likes and comments than anything I'd been tagged in before. Old friends from the service chimed in, neighbors, people from church. "Happy birthday, Robert. You look great, haven't seen that smile in years. Wish I could have been there. One of the kindest men I know." The words hit differently than the silence I'd been getting from Mark and Laura. These people had no reason to say them other than they meant them. Then I noticed another notification, a private message. It was from a guy named Greg who'd gone to school with Mark and Laura. We talked a few times over the years when he'd bump into me in town. It read, "Saw the photo. Didn't realize it was your birthday yesterday. I was over at Mark's place last night, big dinner. Lots of people, surprised you weren't there. I set the phone down slowly. I didn't need Greg to explain. I'd seen it with my own eyes driving past their house. But now that the photo from Keller's was floating around, my kids were bound to see it too. And when they did, they'd see me surrounded by people laughing, living without them. That thought didn't sting the way I thought it might. It felt honest. For once, the picture matched the truth. The truth was, I hadn't been part of their celebration, but I'd had my own. And looking at that photo, I realized something I hadn't been able to put into words before. I didn't just skip the mortgage payment yesterday. I'd paid something else instead, paid into my own life. And it was already giving me more in return than 10 years of quiet transfers ever had. The photo from Keller's stayed on my phone screen long after the notification stopped buzzing. Every time I looked at it, I noticed something new, the way Frank's eyes crinkled when he laughed, the small smile on Mrs. Carter's face, the plate of half-eaten sliders in front of me that I'd barely touched because I was too busy talking. It didn't look like a man who'd been forgotten on his birthday. It looked like a man who'd remembered himself. By the next day, I heard through the grapevine that Mark and Laura had seen the post. Neither of them called. Not to ask about the party, not to ask why I hadn't been at theirs, not even to ask again about the mortgage payment. And that was fine, because somewhere in the quiet of that morning, I realized that my choice the other day wasn't about punishing them. It wasn't about making them feel the absence of my money. It was about me stepping back into my own life, the one I'd been slowly setting aside for theirs. Love, I decided, isn't meant to flow only in one direction. You can pour and pour into someone, but if they never think to pour back into you, the well runs dry. And once it's dry, all you have left is the echo of your own giving. For years, I'd mistaken obligation for love. I'd believed that being dependable meant I was loved in return. But dependable isn't the same as cherished. And I wanted to be cherished, even if it meant by fewer people. The money that didn't go to the bank was still in my account. Maybe it would pay for a fishing trip with Frank. Maybe I'd finally replace the Chevy before winter. Or maybe I'd just keep it for the next time I wanted to fill a room with laughter and music. Whatever I did with it, I knew this. I wasn't going back to being invisible. As I stood at the window that afternoon, coffee in hand, I glanced at the calendar one last time. The red heart was still there, drawn by Linda's hand all those years ago. She'd wanted me to know my birthday mattered. And this year, finally, I had honored that promise, not by waiting for someone else to remember, but by remembering myself. The street outside was quiet, the sun breaking through after days of rain. I took a slow sip of coffee, breathed in the warm light, and felt no need to explain my choices to anyone. Love has to be returned. And if it's not, you learn to return it to yourself. Thank you for joining me for this story on Family Shadows. I hope it reminds you to see the people in your life who quietly give so much, and to let them know they matter before the chance slips away. I wish you and your family health, peace, and the kind of happiness that comes from knowing love is mutual. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.